an organizational flow chart. I'm just providing this. I don't know that you really need to look at it. I don't know why it doesn't want to do it.
Control.
Oh, I hit Control Alt instead of Control click. Yeah. So this is Peter Dubois. These are the people who are at the top and at the Huntington. The Huntington is a nonprofit theater. It's probably it's the most prestigious nonprofit theater in Boston. Okay? It's associated with Boston University, but it's a separate entity. It's a regional theater. Peter is the artistic director, okay? And Michael Masso is the managing director. So to get an idea of who these people are, you can take a quick look at their bios if you like. There's also an organizational chart in there about how those things are broken down. It just sort of puts a personality to who these people are, what an artistic director is. Now a director is then brought in by the artistic director to direct a particular production. So now we're going from looking at the macro, from looking at the big picture of the whole theater, and we're just looking at a particular production. Okay? So this director is directing this show. All right? They may or may not have picked a play, but they work with the playwright. They may or may not have hired particular designers, but they work with the designers. The stage manager, the actors, the musicians. Basically, they are working with everyone who has any hand in that show, and they are in charge of the artistic decisions of that show. That's the way we do it in the theater. Okay? When we talk about the physical plan, okay, we're talking about the physical architecture and facility of the theater. So the word theater gets a little confusing because you say theater when you're talking about the work, quote unquote, which would mean the play, okay, or the dance production, or the music, or whatever. So I'm making a piece of theater, but we also talk about theater as a building, as a place, okay? So sometimes people will say, well, we call it the physical plant instead, all right? So the physical plant is where the audience enters and where the audience comes through, and sits is what we call the house. So as a theater itself is broken down into two main parts. Okay? The stage house and the house. We don't call it the house. Alright? Of course now they changed the website. Nice. That's not the website I want. Let's see here, we'll get a different picture. Okay, so this is the stage at Wellfleet Harbor Actors Theater. It's a brand new theater. Okay, and we're looking at it. This is the stage, and that's the house where the seats are. Okay, everybody see that? Mm-hmm. All right, so she's the stage manager of the Huntington. So now we're here. Everything on stage is the stage house. Okay? Everything on stage is oriented to the actor. So when I am standing on stage, right is my right. Left is my left. Bless you.
Bless you.
Okay? So everything on stage is oriented to the actor. Everything in the audience is oriented to the audience. So that becomes right becomes house right. Okay? Left becomes house left. Does that make sense? So, if I'm talking to someone on stage and I tell them to go right, to walk right, I mean stage right. Okay? Not my right. Okay? If I'm standing on stage and I'll say, okay, I want you to go over to the right, it means stage right. Okay? Stages used to be what we call raked. They had a slight slant. They were higher physically in the back and lower in the front. The reason was that the audience generally was on one level, and so it was easier to see people's faces if they were a little higher as they went back. Otherwise, they'd be stacked up in a row. You wouldn't be able to see them as well. Okay? So, because of that ancient tradition, we call the back of the stage upstage and the front of the stage downstage. Okay? So we don't say walk to the front or walk to the back. We say go upstage or go downstage. Okay? There is no similar front-back terminology for the house. Okay? So again, two different worlds, in a sense, two different orientations in terms of talking. This is important to you as you're reading stage directions. Okay? You start trying to visualize what's going on in a play and you're reading the stage directions. It says they're walking stage right or stage left, or you may see USL, which would be upstage left. Okay? Or US, upstage. Okay? It means they're walking to the back of the auditorium. This way. Okay? Any questions about that? Can get a little confusing. Alright? Above the audience and above the actors, we have where all the lights, the sound equipment, all of that is stored. We call that the grid. Okay? The grid. It is a series, in the modern theater, it is a series of pipes, intersecting pipes, of which are exposed to the audience. In older theaters, they used to hide those things up into the rafters, so all you saw was a nice ceiling. Okay? And you didn't see the lights over the stage because we used to have curtains that sort of hid them, called tormentors. Not something we use anymore. Now, very common for you to come into a theater and be able to see all the equipment above your head. You just suspend your disbelief. You don't pay attention to them. Again, a theatrical tradition. If somebody went into the theater in the 1920s and they saw all of that equipment, they would think that the place was not ready for, the show wasn't ready to open yet. Because they would expect to see a nice, pretty, framed picture, framed in curtains or framed in architecture, where they saw the play, no equipment, and they would look above their head and they would see a nice ceiling. They wouldn't see lights hanging over their head. They would think the place was under construction. Okay? So that is something that has changed. It's a theatrical tradition that's changed. This theater was built only a few years ago. Fully exposed lighting. Also, fully exposed booth. Okay? This booth at the back of the theater is where the stage manager controls the show. During the production of a show, a stage manager is in charge of running the show. Okay? They call all the cues in sequence. They tell people where to go. How do they do it from back here? Obviously, wireless communication. They have people on both sides of the stage that are helping tell people when to come on, when to go off, etc. Cueing people. Also, they have a computer lighting console that controls all the lighting. A computer sound console, which can cue all the sound cues. All that is controlled now from a single place. Whereas even when I was in the theater when I was young, it was very difficult to do that from a single place. We had lighting control from back here, but there was a lot more practical sound things that we did, and also cueing people backstage was very difficult because we didn't have the ability to walk around with headsets and have people walk. You had to be on the telephone to somebody backstage. So generally speaking, I know it sounds like I was back in the 19th century or something. I'm talking when I was in college, right, in the early 80s, mid-80s. And it was just happened that our theater didn't have that kind of thing. So we had to have somebody downstage who would literally follow along with the script and send people on. And they would send them on whether the lights were on or not, because there was really hardly any way to communicate. Okay? Now that's all changed. Everybody can walk around with the wireless communication and talk all the time, even when they shouldn't be. Okay? So, it gives you a pretty good idea. In terms of the sequencing of the show, this is important in terms of how we process the production. Okay? So when I talk about a show in production, what I'm talking about is creating the show. Oh, one thing that I didn't talk about in terms of the audience, okay? Sight lines, we did mention that, okay? If I'm looking over here, if the actor can see me, and I can see the actor, generally speaking, okay? So how you are on stage, we work with sight lines at the beginning of this class. I was wondering whether everybody was going to be able to see this screen, okay? Effective canvas, not that important a term, but important in the sense of, for example, man, you're going to give me your name one more time. What's your first name? Your first name.
Scott.
Ahead of you.
Jose.
Jose. So, Jose, can you see the floor right here really well?
No.
Okay, that's not an effective canvas. If this is a show, if I'm thinking of this area, this playing space, I would call it, and you're the audience, and I want something to communicate something about what this playing space is, like I want to say, okay, this is taking place on a runway, okay, and I paint something on that floor, it's really not going to do much good for Jose because he can't see it very well. It's Jose, right?
Yep.
Okay, so that's not an effective canvas. But if I put a plane over here, you can see that pretty well, right? So that's a better thing to put on that stage to help communicate airport runway to Jose. You feel me on that? Kind of important as we're looking at stuff. Okay? So sight lines. Jose has crummy sight lines on this floor. Therefore, this floor is not an effective canvas. Okay? Shoot.
Are these notes going to be online?
You're looking at them. They're all online.
Okay.
Right. All right. So that can be said of, in terms of effectiveness, that's something I want you to pay attention to when we're looking at things when you go to the play. Again, this is going to be something that's going to figure into your critique. You know, could I see it? Could I hear it? Did I understand the story? Okay? So, people that are involved in the actual production. Maybe we'll take a quick break with the video.